welcome to the second episode of my newest mini-series, The Best Parts of Resident Evil. On today's episode, we'll be taking a look at the original nightmare with the video game that started it all, Resident Evil. While Resident Evil may not be the first ever survival horror game, it is the one that made the subgenre popular. In fact, it was Resident Evil that inspired many other developers to follow in Capcom's footsteps. Konami, for example, took their shot at it with Silent Hill, and Square Enix tried to cash in on the genre as well with Parasite Eve. So with a game that pretty much put survival horror on the map, it's time to take a closer look at the game and truly find out what really made it stand out. From branching narratives to the setting itself, my name is Ruben with Nerdspace Games, and this is my top 10 best parts of Resident Evil 1. Let's get it. Number 10, Life to Death Puzzle. The RE franchise is full of iconic puzzles, and the first game is no different. Actually, one of the most iconic puzzles of the franchise is within the Spencer Mansion itself. Eventually, the player will come across a gallery with multiple portraits in it. At the end of the hallway, there's a riddle waiting for the player. Basically, it's telling you to activate the buttons under each portrait in order of the life cycle. Now, thanks to the graphics of the original game, trying to base this completely off of the pictures itself is a little difficult, so instead, the player will need to solve the puzzle by reading the words under each portrait that point to what the order is. Get it right, and you'll get a key item needed to access the exterior part of the mansion. Get it wrong, well, there's a bunch of terrifying crows waiting to feed on you. Oh, and don't you dare think about firing off a single shot when you're inside of this room, because you'll regret it. Number 9, 2 campaigns. While it may not be as expansive as RE2, the original game also featured 2 separate protagonists, each with their own campaigns. You could play as Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine. Of the 2 characters, Jill's scenario was seen as the easy mode of the game. In her campaign, you would have 8 inventory spots instead of 6. You'll get the lockpick early on instead of having to find small keys to unlock certain things. And probably the most beneficial part in playing as Jill, you'll have Barry. As Jill, there are certain areas within the game in which Barry will save Jill. For example, using the V-Jolt will allow Jill to skip Plan 42 altogether thanks to him saving her. Or he might save Jill from becoming a Jill sandwich and allow her to get the shotgun without finding the broken shotgun first. But the main benefit of having 2 separate campaigns are the additional scenes that you'll get for each character. For example, as Chris, you'll get to meet Rebecca Chambers, have Enrico accuse Chris of being a traitor, and see Wesker shoot Rebecca. As Jill, you'll have Barry assisting you all game, then betray you not once but multiple times, and finally you could see him betray Wesker to save Jill. While the 2 campaigns don't really change up the puzzles or anything else to make the experience feel fresh, it does still motivate you to play as both characters to experience both of their individual stories as the main protagonists. Number 8, interesting boss fights. Resident Evil may not feature the best boss fights of the franchise, but it does come pretty close. In fact, the original game's boss fights were so iconic that most of them were reused for future games. For example, the Yan, a giant snake and personally my favorite boss of the game, inspired other enemies like the invisible snake in RE6 and even the giant worms in both RE3 and Code Veronica. Black Tiger, the giant spider found in the caves of the game, provided the inspiration for a giant Black Widow in Code Veronica. And probably the most iconic boss fight of the game, the Tyrant, was used multiple times in multiple games as it became the most common boss of the franchise. Another boss in the game, Plan 42, could be defeated or weakened by solving a simple puzzle that leads to the creation of V-Jolt and then using that chemical on the roots of Plan 42. The game may not have featured the most difficult bosses, but it did include some of the most iconic designs for bosses that would later inspire many other terrifying monsters of the series. Number 7, The First Hunter. While zombies were around in video games long before Resident Evil, the first game of the series introduced a lot of its own unique and original monsters to video games. However, probably the most iconic and terrifying monster introduced in the first game was the Hunter. This reptile-like creature had deadly claws that could decapitate the player with its leap attack. Its speed, swipe attacks, and leap attacks made it the most deadly enemy inside the Spencer Mansion. And you'll never forget your first encounter with the Hunter thanks to a short cutscene of a Hunter following your footsteps back into the mansion before attempting to kill you. The hunter was so terrifying and memorable that it would return in future entries of the series with a lot of different variations of it. Number 6. Albert Wesker. While the original Nightmare introduced plenty of franchise characters that would later become fan favorites, only 2 characters really made their mark in the original Nightmare enough to earn them a spot on today's list. The first of those 2 characters is the greatest villain of all time, Albert Wesker. One of the most important things in any story is to have a villain that the audience can love to hate, and Wesker managed to do that perfectly for us. In the original game, Wesker is seen as an ally at first. However, over time, the player eventually learns that Wesker betrayed Stars and he's responsible for most of the team dying. Now, obviously, Wesker becomes more iconic in other games like RE5 and Code Veronica. However, he still has some memorable moments in this game. For one, outside of one other character in the game, Wesker has the best one-liners.
Stop it! Don't open that door! Stop it. Jill, our first priority is to get out of here.
Chris, there are a lot of locked rooms in that house. Check them out one more time. There must be a place to hide safely. I'll look around the house a little more.
On top of that, his iconic speech at the end of the game is one of the most memorable moments, as he describes why he did what he did and even introduced the Tyrant, the perfect life form. And while Wesker does fall a little short on this list by claiming the number 6 spot, he's someone that continues to grow over time within the franchise, and there's no doubt in my mind that he'll be higher on the list for some of the other RE games that he appears in. Number 5. Branching narratives. As I said earlier, RE1 featured 2 separate campaigns, which included different scenes that you could only see in that character's specific playthrough. For example, Jill will never meet Rebecca and Chris will never meet Barry in their respective campaigns. However, the game goes one step farther with its branching narratives. I cover this in a different video, but in the original Resident Evil game, different scenes would occur depending on the choices you made throughout the story. For example, Chris could find Rebecca in one of 2 different rooms, either with Richard or in the safe room where you find the antidote for the snake poison. This will also affect other situations in the game, like if Rebecca will be attacked by a hunter or not. The same could be said for Jill's playthrough. Choosing not to wait for Barry to return with more rope after the second fight against the Yon, for example, will lead to his death. Or choosing to let Barry lead the way and then not follow him right away in the caves will also lead to Barry's death. There's other unique scenes that can only be discovered based on decisions made throughout the game that motivates replayability to find new and exciting scenes each playthrough that you might have missed the first time around with each character. Number 4. Live action intro. Easily one of the most memorable moments of Resident Evil is that live action intro of the first game. Sure, the intro may have been extremely cringy, but hey, that was part of the charm. In the intro, we see Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, and the rest of STAR's Alpha Team arrive in the Arklay Mountains to search for Bravo Team. After arriving, we would see one of them get attacked and brutally murdered by zombie dogs. After which, Brad will leave Alpha Team behind and they'll be forced to retreat into the Spencer Mansion. Yeah, probably the most iconic part of this intro is the sequence that we get with typical 90s action music and a short clip showcasing the live action version of each main character of the game.
Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, Rebecca Chambers, Albert Wesker, Resident Evil.
Again, cringy as hell, but I enjoyed every second of it. That intro was fucking fire. Number 3, Barry Burton's one-liners. Okay, at first I was going to put the Jill sandwich quote as its own entry on this list, but let's face it, almost everything out of Barry's mouth is hilarious, memorable, and absolutely cringy as hell. But you know what? We all love him for it. I mean, I can't even keep count of how many iconic lines this dude has in the original game. Yeah, so obviously his most famous one is the Jill sandwich quote after saving Jill from the trap room.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
But there are plenty of awesome Barry Burton quotes in the game, like how about when he gives you acid rounds.
I found something.
What is it?
It's a weapon. It's really powerful, especially against living things. Better take it with you. We could get into trouble if we get lost. We should start from the first floor, okay? And Jill, here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
God, I fucking love Barry one-liners. I can listen to them all day. Number 2, the first zombie. Throughout the RE franchise, we've seen plenty of incredible monster intros, but none of them compared to the original introduction of the first zombie of the series. After investigating the dining room, either Chris or Jill will find themselves in a nearby hallway in which a zombie is feeding on their poor comrade, Kenneth. I'll be completely straight with you, I don't think there's anything I can say that would capture the essence of this moment and how important it is to the Resident Evil franchise. In fact, this scene is so badass that it's best to just play the damn clip and leave it at that. Number 1, the Spencer Mansion. The best part about Resident Evil 1996 is the setting of the game. That's right, the Spencer Mansion. Sure, Resident Evil isn't the first franchise to explore a giant spooky mansion, and it's definitely not the last, but it's basically impossible to come up with a better and more iconic mansion in a video game than the Spencer Mansion. The moment we open the front doors and enter the world of survival horror, the Spencer Mansion overwhelms us with a feeling of uneasiness. The main hall is forever sketched into our minds in the sound of zombies walking down each hallway as we run through the long and narrow corridors of this mansion will keep us up at night just thinking about it. There's so many iconic, memorable locations inside this single building. The dining hall as the grandfather clock echoes throughout the 2-story room with every second that passes. The attic, a place where you come face to face with your first boss fight of the game against a giant snake in a small battlefield. The terrifying caves that rest under the Spencer Mansion courtyard, which are full of dangerous hunters around every corner. The first floor east hallway, which has one of the best jump scares of the franchise in the form of zombie dogs jumping through the windows. The room on the second floor, where the ceiling begins to descend after we activate a trap by removing a shotgun. A library with a window where you can see the final location of the game, the helipad, waiting for you to arrive and fight the final boss of the game, the Tyrant. Every inch of the Spencer Mansion is so iconic that most hardcore RE fans can describe exactly what's behind every single door within the mansion, myself included. But that's it for today's episode of Nerd Space Games. Hit up the comments and let me know what you think of my list. Is the Spencer Mansion the best part of the original Resident Evil game, or is there something else that deserves that title? Let me know down below. Anyway, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my channel for more survival horror content. Also, leave a like on today's video if you enjoyed today's topic. But thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerd Space Games. Take care.